Welcome to The Mandate, a show featuring intimate conversations about men's mental health, masculinity, and identity. We bring you stories to inspire you, experts to guide you, and the tools you need to become the man you truly want to be. It's time to sit back, relax, and open up. Live from the Mandate Studio in Austin, Texas, here's your host, Adam Hoffman.
All right, well, hopefully there was some audio coming through with that. If not, just another learning as a part of the show. But today we are live. We've got a special morning episode because I have my dear friend Jos joining us from around the world in Cape Town, South Africa. So today we are going to be talking about the societal pressures put on boys and men. We will get to learn more about a book that she worked on called Tackled a few years back that looked at this issue amongst other things. We'll talk about creating safe spaces to have these types of conversations, mental health, and probably a whole lot more. So with that, let me bring Jos on. How's it going?
Hey, Adam. So nice to see you. How are you?
I'm doing really, really well. I'm excited to have you. I usually talk to people in the evening, so now I get to start my day talking about this stuff, which is lovely.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being considerate of time zones. I appreciate it.
You got it. So I think it's the end of your workday-ish, although you're always working on cool stuff.
Yeah, we're having fun here, doing lots of creating where we can. Obviously, COVID has put some work on hold, or at least made us, be creative. And yeah, we're at 5 p.m. right now. So
right on.
Still have a fun things to do this evening.
Yeah. So I'm going to tell a quick backstory of how you and I know each other, and then we'll jump in. But you are incredibly special to me on this journey because I like to think that the universe just like transmitted a message that I needed to hear that you gave to me back this fall. And for everybody who's watching, we got to know each other through our work at Singularity. And Jos is doing some really cool stuff with education and AI, amongst many other projects that she always has going on. But what was just so crazy was that I had kind of had this inkling of the idea for men's mental health, tackling masculinity. And you and I just had a catch-up conversation. And I'm like, yeah, I think I want to like do this event about life transitions to help people. You're like, yeah, that's a cool idea. Can I build on that a little bit? I have this other idea for you. I think you should tackle men's issues. Nobody's really doing it and like helping men create these safe spaces to have these conversations. And I was like, oh my gosh, have you been in my brain? How is this happening? What is going on? So that conversation, I don't know if I ever told you this, just like set me on this path where every other conversation resulted in somebody saying something similar or making an introduction. I was like, well, I kind of can't ignore this anymore. I have to go for it. So thank you. You were the inspiration that got us to Mandate in the first place. And I just so appreciate it.
Oh, that is so nice to hear. Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, I genuinely support your work. I believe it's probably amongst the most important work that we could be doing in the world and that you're doing in the world. So I'm so glad that it would have already been in your aura. It would have already been in your space. But if it needed a little jolt, then yay, awesome. Congrats on what you've achieved so far, though, Adam. I have to be honest. Like you said, we spoke in September, and I was willing to bet it was a bit later. So if we think about the fact that in just a couple of months, you've set up this platform, you've had guests, you're just going for it. And, so many people sit with this idea and you just are running with it. So it's awesome to see and very inspiring for, I'm sure, many entrepreneurs out there to see that you can just follow what's going on for you and follow, what your instinct is saying. So congrats.
I really appreciate that and appreciate all the support along the way. So let's get in and talk about you, though. So I love having female friends on the show to give another perspective on what's going on here. Tell us a little bit about what you're up to, just kind of who is Jos and what's your life look like right now?
Sure. So you're right that I'm in Cape Town, South Africa. I've lived here before, but with COVID, I think many of us had maybe a traveling lifestyle. So I was definitely living a huge traveling lifestyle. I was based in Dubai, the United Arab Emirates, and it's kind of like all over the map. And that's basically how the last 33 years that I've been on Earth um, have been for me. And then when COVID hit, I just was like, I'm going to probably spend a little more time in one location because there are no flights. So I ended up being in the Netherlands for about 4 months with my folks, bought a house, fully renovated it. So I couldn't really live in the house yet, and just ended up really calming down, like really just slowing down and not having jet lag for the first time in like 15 years and not living out of hotels and suitcases. And it just like dropped me into an entirely different space. Spent a few months in Greece and then came through to South Africa, kind of been in and out of South Africa and the Netherlands ever since. And before that, like I said, I've been traveling a lot. And because we want to touch on the subject of masculinity, the first time when I was living in South Africa, we did a lot of work with girls and young women. And we pretty early on realized that, and it's work I'm very passionate about, but that a big part of the conversation, i.e. boys and men, was really missing in that dialogue. And, it really focused on the girl child. And I still believe that there's a lot of space to focus on the girl child. I won't waver from my commitment. But at the same time, we felt it was critical to start having more conversations with boys and men.
Yes. Well, I couldn't agree more. And as I was thinking about this episode, I was like, there's so many things that I want to cover with you and places to start. And I want to get to the book, but maybe first let's go a little bit more spiritual, because I know that when you and I were talking, the event that happened before our conversation was my wife sent me this podcast that was talking about the rise of feminine energy in the universe. And I was kind of listening to it in the beginning being like, okay, this is like kind of on the edge of my comfort level with like spirituality. I get it. It makes sense. And then it got into the struggle that men are having and will continue to have with it to kind of create this overall restore balance, if you will, the yin and the yang, masculine, feminine, whatever you want to call it in the universe. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. So when you think about masculine and feminine energy, what does that mean to you?
Thank you for that great question. I do remember that now from our call. We all obviously have both polarities in our system. And as we try and restructure roles and how we respond to societal pressures on either end of that polarity, whether it's a response with our masculine energy or a response with our feminine energy, over the last while, I would say, very long time, masculine energy, particularly in workspaces, has, in a sense, dominated, or at least our recognition of masculine energy. So when I haven't heard that podcast, I'd love to hear it. But if you think about the rise of feminine energy, I think it triggers us. It might trigger someone because it's like, well, what do I do with that? I actually don't know how to manage that. What does that even mean for me? I'm a man. But the truth is that we all have both and we all embody both. Now, I think for women, there's permission. And unfortunately, we have that permission already. It's unfortunate that we felt maybe that we had to compromise it or hide it in order to be taken seriously at work or in order to progress at work. And by no means do I believe that any of those restrictions have been lifted. They're still very much in place. If you turn up as your full feminine self, that might be held against you, whether you are a man or a woman. So when I speak of masculine and feminine, I'm not talking about man or woman. I'm basically talking about the embodiment of the energy in your soul and how it's expressed within you on a soul level. And unfortunately, we haven't always created space for both energies to have a safety and a way to express themselves. And it doesn't serve men or women either way. So when we think about the rise of feminine energy, well, to be fair, I would say that it's time. Without that balance, we have what we had for the last 4 years. And I can speak about it in really clear terms. We know that the pillars of a society are education and healthcare. Without education and healthcare, we're really nowhere. You can have the strongest military in the world, but if people are not healthy and if they're not educated, it doesn't serve anyone. You still need a strategic, healthy brain someone who understands how their body works, somatically can get in touch with themselves and understands their mind before that army or military has any way to perform. So if we don't have that balance, and that's unfortunately something that we've seen in the political sphere, we will lose. We will lose. We will all lose. So, I mean, we can have a long discussion about the role of the virus and bringing awareness around this, but save that for another day. The balance is 100% necessary. And I can only speak from a female perspective and living in some pretty tough countries, right? Living in the United Arab Emirates, traveling to countries across the African continent that were not always that easy to navigate, countries in the Middle East that were not easy to navigate. That takes a toll because you all of a sudden realize that your defense is coming from a masculine place because the feminine wouldn't necessarily be safe. I'm not saying it's not as strong. I'm not saying it's not as powerful. I'm just saying there wasn't safety for that. And if I was feeling that way, and I know I have conversations with women, I am mindful that other people embodying feminine energy would be feeling the same way. So that's one thing. And I'm happy to pause there if you had a thought to share.
Yeah, I mean, so much good stuff in there. And I would love to know, how does masculine energy show up for you? Like, what does masculine energy look like in Jos?
So funny. Well, that is hilarious. So let me just tell you the story. Last year, I met with two good friends here in Cape Town, December, whatever, 6th or 7th or something. And we were having drinks at the rooftop, like balcony of the friend's hotel. And we were having this chat, and all of a sudden my friend was like, we were talking like, yeah, we're so happy we're not traveling as much anymore. You know, like we'd have lunch in London and then like followed by dinner in New York and then like having calls with the Dubai time zone and like one colleague's in Hong Kong. And the friend goes, and they were both guys, and the friend goes, yeah, it always felt like we were conquering, like we were achieving, like there was this thing about flying from one time zone to the other and like still being back home on time for dinner. And like, you know, I looked at them and something dropped for me. I was like, yeah, you're right. I was achieving and conquering, but it never worked for me. It never worked. I was exhausted. There were times where I couldn't even get my period because I was in an airplane and my body can't drop because I'm in the sky. So nothing in my system is allowing for that to be held. And it was the same for me. I experienced it in the desert. The desert is barren. A woman's body needs fluid to survive. Babies are born in water. So, you know, think about all this birthing and this birthing energy coming into the world through the feminine. If we don't water it, nothing's going to happen. And so if we have enough women or enough people embodying feminine energy, and again, I say embodying feminine energy because men embody it as well, but if that side is not nurtured, it will dry up and it cannot form, it cannot land. So when I heard my friend say, gosh, it felt like we were always just achieving, we were always conquering the next flight, I thought to myself, wow, that is so not a space that I always want to reside in. So I realized all of a sudden that my masculine energy was showing up that way. And then I thought back to being the CEO of an edtech company. I mean, how much choice do I have to always show up with full feminine creative energy? You know, I don't. And that's okay. You know, I don't mind tapping into the masculine, but I don't want to do it all the time. It's actually a compromise on who I am. So because we haven't always held that space for those of us embodying feminine energy as our base, from to create, to design, again, to birth, to land, it becomes really difficult for some of the world's best ideas to get out there. So it's really important that we have that balance. So your original question, how does masculine energy show up for me? While I was driving a meeting this morning, I was driving it. And afterwards, I apologized to my team. I didn't apologize. I was careful not to apologize. But I said, you know, I'm mindful that I dropped into driving instead of surrendering. I know what needs to happen. It'll happen. I've got amazing people around me, and those are with me because I brought them on this journey of creation. So why drive when you can surrender? It takes a lot of trust. It takes a lot of energetic awareness, and it takes a lot of being in touch with your body, which doesn't happen if you're jet lagged, in order to get to that state.
Yeah, I love a lot of that because it's, I don't know, a lot of analogies came to my head. One of them was like, if you're trying to make a painting and you only have one color. It's like men and women and people who don't identify as either one of those, which is a whole nother topic that I'm excited to get into on the show at some point, is like as a guy, there's this whole world out there of feelings and emotions and tools that I just don't see guys dropping into, if you will, on a regular basis. And I really appreciate the desert metaphor, or the idea that if you don't water it, if you don't nurture it, it just dries up. And to me, I think in a lot of guys, there's just not even awareness that exists, because there's, it's hard to understand feelings or communicate feelings or get in touch with our body. Like a lot of the things that you talked about, I've heard from men as well. Like they're foreign concepts, and the idea of getting into one of those things just isn't really an option. And then when we do, like you were kind of saying, when you see your masculine energy show up in ways that that don't work, or you have to hold back your feminine energy because the place isn't right. Those were some of the feelings that I had as I was reflecting on, from that podcast about when I was a little kid. And I loved singing as a kid. And then it got to the point where as a boy, it was kind of like, only gay kids are in choir. Only gay guys are in choir. Like, if you're in choir, you must be gay, Adam. And it's like, wait a second, can I just like to sing? It's like, oh, no, that's like a thing that girls do. Like girls are in choir. And so then when we're young, we start to have all these things that for a period of time were okay. Anybody could do them. But then they start to become not okay. These gender norms that emerge in the world that really start to put men, I feel like, in that box, that then by the time that they're an adult, they've forgotten that they're in the box in the first place. But they're like, something just doesn't feel right. Like, why do I only have this? But I feel like there's something else out there for me to really get into.
I love that. Thank you for saying that. And I'm sorry to hear about your experience too, because that's just one example. And there's millions of them. There's millions of them. Why shouldn't you be allowed to sing? It's an incredibly beautiful experience for the listener and for you. So, but like that you shared today, and I think many men and boys can relate to that, because that permission that you should just have, and it reflects in different. It's all over. It ranges, right? You gave one example, but it can be cooking, or it can be it can be the arm, whatever it is. Like, it doesn't matter. There are those restrictions that we put, and it doesn't really serve anyone.
Yeah, well, maybe this is a good segue into your work with men and boys. Talk a little bit about your book, Tackled. Where did it come from? What's the story behind it?
Sure. So we had been working with girls and young women for about 3.5 years, and it was incredible work. And I stand behind it, and we continued doing it for a long time. But we realized at that stage in our journey that boys and young men were not included in the conversation, and still aren't really included in certain elements of that conversation. So we interviewed almost 800 boys and young men across South Africa through polls and key informant interviews. So we did an approach of interview styles. And the results were fascinating, Adam. Like, first of all, the boys and young men had no issues talking about what bothered them, which I thought was amazing. So I didn't know if that was like a geographical thing, or it was because we were a group of women, so they felt maybe safer. Maybe it was an accent, right? It was a foreign accent. Sometimes you feel more comfortable talking to somebody who doesn't sound or look like you because they're far removed. I'm not sure what worked, or what worked for us then, but the results were incredible, and we had some great men that supported our work. The captain of the South African Springboks, the rugby team here, Sia Kolisi. We had an amazing football player who was one of the best in his day, Fabio Cannavaro. So just like incredible people always supporting the work. And I think athletes can stand up for it because they've been forced to only show one side of themselves. When they are fathers, they are singers, they might be dancers, who knows, whatever it is that they're tapping into at home is a really important sense of self as well. So I enjoyed doing that work because sport did allow us to kind of break down some of those barriers. And that was really key. It's a safe space for men and boys, which is why we actually started our work with sport, with football. And because it was such a safe space, it was easier to have conversations that might feel more difficult.
Yeah, got it. What were some of the conversations that you had? Like, what were the topics that you'd cover?
They were tough. We talked about We talked about everything from, masculinity to these boys lacking maybe a father figure or a role model, or having to work jobs since they were 12 or 13, or being okay with rape, understanding why rape happens, right? So that's not a piece of judgment. It's a piece of education that we need to solve. If a young boy or man is saying it's okay to rape, we have to have a conversation, and that's okay. But let's at least be brave enough to have it. Why is it okay? Let's talk about why you think it's okay. And that's a lot around the women's body too, that we haven't really fully understood. But because the women's body has been so disassociated from the actual human inhabiting it, for example, images of a woman's body versus the experience you have of your mother, who is a real life woman that you love in most cases. I mean, I'm speaking broadly here. You can disassociate then that a woman is a real being. And that has been a real issue. And we saw it unfortunately reflected in the political behaviors, for the last 4 or 5 years, where there's just a complete disregard from the human that inhabited the female body, essentially. And that disconnect leads to things like masculinity forming unhealthy thought processes.
Yeah. How were you able to go into those conversations and not be, well, I guess I can't, I'm not saying that you weren't this way, that you didn't get triggered right off the bat, learning that boys and young men were nonchalant or oblivious to this idea of rape being bad. How can you stand in those conversations with, sounds like, the curiosity that you had to listen and understand?
Well, I appreciate your question. And I think it's because I'm more interested in solving the problem by understanding it than I am by judging it. When it's a boy or a young man, there's still hope. When it's a president who sets a precedent, there's way less hope. So it still gave me faith that the work that we were doing was going to have a long-term positive impact. But I can't tell you that I wasn't sick in bed in 2016 for 3 weeks. I mean, I don't really know how collectively that period was survived. And I don't know if it was, but time will tell. But at the end of the day, it's hard, because unless someone has said and broken down, hey, you know what, there's another way to think about it, because it's maybe not okay. It's just a conversation that we need to have. Now, mind you, Adam, I'm originally from the Netherlands. I wasn't born there, but my parents are Dutch. And, I did live there for a few years, 4 years. I went to an American private high school there because we'd been living in different countries. So to integrate in the Dutch system would have been difficult. So I went to an American school. And the reason I bring this up is because one of the things that I'm most proud of my home country, if you will, is that they start with sexual education when kids are 4. And the Netherlands has the highest rate of early childhood education. It's 100% of kids that are 3 and 4 are going to some kind of school. And they start and they show kids these pictures of a woman's body and a man's body, and they're like, well, this is what's going on here, and that's what this is, and that's this body part, and this is how it all works. And the kids are like, okay, got it. And this kind of openness and naturalness of the human body then makes it way less taboo. It makes it not something to conquer, but it makes it something to respect and enjoy. And that's something that we should take through life in any case, right? Because that makes intimacy down the line so much more fun when you're looking at it from a place of mutual enjoyment rather than judgment or ownership.
Yeah, that judgment piece has been top of mind for me so much as I have more of these conversations, whether they're ones that are on the show or ones that aren't on the show, is when somebody makes a comment that I have a visceral reaction to, I have to stay so present to going to curiosity and understanding versus judgment. And I think that there's always going to be some semblance of judgment there in the beginning, because I don't know if I'll be able to unwire that part of my brain as hard as I try. But knowing that I can always counteract it with curiosity so that I can move forward with that commitment. And but it's hard. Some of the topics that have come up recently. I've been talking to guys about their wives, their relationships with their partners, and some of the stuff that gets said. I'm just like, oh my God, really? That's what you think? That's what you believe? I say that into my head. I don't say that out loud. But I come back with like a nice question to like help me understand more and move forwards. And what I've realized is that so often our judgment of somebody else ends up showing up and manifesting as guilt and shame in that other person. Eventually, maybe not in the moment. In the moment, they just might be angry or upset or pissed or whatever. But then later on, it comes to guilt. And I wonder I'd love your thoughts on the role that you think guilt and shame plays in helping men open up and be more whole.
No, that's a great question. And thank you also for sharing what that response does to you, right? Because if we don't pay more attention to how our body's responding to something, the body tells us our answers before our mind does, in a way. So if you can tap into that and take a second, I think it's very powerful. Guilt and shame are tricky. I think I used to think that I didn't have that as strongly as maybe other people. Grew up in a safe home with really epic parents, but obviously we all have guilt. We all feel guilty about things. And I think for men and young boys in the conversations we had, it was a shame of not living up to what they thought they should have been by then. Perhaps not being able to provide for a partner in the way that they thought, or perhaps not having had, the job that they thought and they were going to have. And I think that turns into aggression, or it turns into frustration, it turns into a feeling like you don't belong. And anybody that doesn't belong is going to find that need fulfilled elsewhere by being overly aggressive or by being overly controversial. If you don't feel valued or heard or safe in your masculinity, you will overplay. You will overcompensate for it. And when you find a man that can actually hold his own and not be responding to the first visceral impulse, but rather showing in the strength of his core, right? Because a lot of the masculine energy can also reside in the chest and in the core, whereas feminine energy maybe is residing more in the womb and the hips. We're listening to different parts of our somatic self. So when you can watch that part of a man relax and hold the space rather than respond, it also gives room for feminine energy, and it gives room for flow. So it becomes a lot easier to navigate and to hold a conversation at the level that it needs to be held. Now, we can have a conversation to talk about how so much of what we live on a daily basis through what we consume suppresses that ability. And because, spaces for yoga and meditation tend to be more female driven, which is really unfortunate, because that kind of breath work or meditative work gives men, like a masculine energy, a huge benefit as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should go in and talk about that as our next part of our conversation, about these things that do sort of suppress those feelings or getting in touch or getting in the way, frankly, of tapping into what I believe is this whole universe of skills and feelings and abilities that for a long time, or for most guys, maybe not a long time, but for most guys, it's a foreign concept. So what do you think are some of those things, we can get into societal pressures, that you feel like really prevent men from tapping into these spaces?
That it's seen as a weakness, Adam. Like, if your biggest fear is to be seen weak, as weak, not you, but if that is the biggest fear, then there's no space for vulnerability. And if there's no space for vulnerability, there's no space to deal with shame or fear, or guilt. And so anything that's labeled as weak becomes a real issue. Not being able to provide or wanting to sing and everything in between is part of the human process. And unless we humanize it, it manifests itself in a very destructive way. And I think that might be where it's a challenge with masculine energy. And I find that if I've overdipped into masculine energy, and I've definitely gone through those phases, I had to when I was living in the Middle East. And I struggled from day one, And I'm not saying that that's the experience for every woman, but it was my experience. It wasn't happy and it wasn't comfortable for me. And I wasn't my best self as a CEO or as a boss at the time. it just wasn't right. It never worked, because I overcompensated. And I felt like, I mean, in a way, I probably had to, because I was so afraid that if I didn't, I would be seen as a weak female, not being able to perform in a male-dominated world. So that's how I can understand that anything that gets that label, we respond to. So we've just reframing what weakness is and what strength is will really help us all.
I love that. And this might feel a little far-fetched, but I'm a big like fantasy book reader. So I can't read nonfiction before I go to bed. I have to read fiction. And there's
Okay.
this series that I absolutely love. And you're making me wonder if the author is making a pass at masculine and feminine energy in the section that I'm in right now, because so there are the three main characters, several books in, can eventually turn into dragons. And like, this is one of those things that I'm sharing out loud. And I'm like, oh my God, like I'm going to get judged for talking, read books about dragons, but I freaking love it, everybody. And so anyways, it's a guy who's the main character and he has two friends and they're women and they turn into these dragons. But what they're realizing is that after they turn into dragons more than once, when they come out of their dragon form, they are these like awful human beings that they are full of hate. They're full of aggression. They're full of anger, and they go at one another. And they're trying to figure out, how can we turn into our dragon forms and then revert back to ourselves without, essentially at this point in time, killing each other. And anyways, what you were just talking about, when you overexert your masculine or you overcompensate for it, there's a price to pay somewhere else that, you're conscious to it, but most people aren't.
That's really fascinating. I don't read dragon books, but I like where you're going with it. And you should, yeah, maybe the author is making a comment on that, but let's be mindful not to say that masculine is negative in any way. It's like you said, it's that overcompensating or the fear that it isn't heard, right? So when we see this response that we've seen politically now, this fear that things are not going to be the same, or the fear that we're going to lose power. Well, unfortunately, that's not really how power works. Power works through sharing and abundance. Power works by building and creating, and anything else is destruction. So holding on to it by leveraging a fear-based strategy will never serve the masculine energy. Nurturing it, and honoring it and respecting it is really different. And that's why I think different cultures play incredible roles as well. One thing I very much enjoyed about living in the Middle East was the influence of East and West meeting in this space of the world. Middle East kind of says it all, like, in a way, right? So it was fascinating to see what came from Indian and Bangladeshi and Pakistani and Chinese and Japanese colleagues versus what comes from North American and Northern European colleagues, and even from colleagues across the African continent, like how all concepts are kind of so different and so unique. And we talk about, even if we talk about Europe having gender balance, and I lived in Norway, which is supposed to be one of the most gender neutral countries in the world, and I've got a lot to say about that. I don't want to anger any Norwegian friends. But it's a conversation that we need to keep having. And I think, that's why, at the beginning I said too, like, the work that you're doing is so critical. And when you start seeing it turn up, and if you yourself can say, hey, it's okay, it's nothing to be afraid of. It's actually just natural evolution. And we all have both sides in us. Tap into the other one for a bit and see how it feels.
I'd love to hear from your perspective what you think, or maybe you've heard from guys that or through your research or experience. What are some ways that guys can practice tapping into their feminine energy? What does that look like?
Okay, love it. I was gonna say, like, enjoy your partner, like whoever your partner is, enjoy the feminine energy that they bring to the space. Like, if they play, if they dance or run or whatever, cook or whatever, or Do anything that triggers creative energy. Enjoy it. Let it serve you. Let it feed your masculine, because it has to. Again, I'm very mindful not to talk about men and women. It's not what this conversation is about. It's about just allowing that energy to come into your space. Just like I've had to learn to sit back and say, oh, it's 5 p.m. I'm going to take a break from making decisions now and let whoever partner is bringing that energy for me take care of some things. It feels good. Let it serve you. There's no need to fight it. It is really a balance. So that's a great way. Enjoy your partner and enjoy the beautiful energy that they bring, because together you can create something so magical. And too many couples don't realize that they can play that role for each other, and it doesn't compromise emancipation. It doesn't compromise how much money you're going to make. It doesn't compromise that you can be the CEO of a business. Again, I work in ed tech. I work in AI. I mean, I constantly have to be mindful of this. So play, keep playing. The second thing I would say is get in touch with your body. Like, don't be afraid of it. If you want to cry, cry. If you want to paint, paint. If you want to sing, sing. It doesn't matter. Listen to your body. And if anything COVID has given us is, I think, people who have maximized time indoors by getting to know themselves on a deeper level. Good Lord, like how far can you go? It's so beautiful. And I'd say, as a woman, I would love for more men to go on that spiritual journey with me. Like, I still don't want to make all the decisions, clearly, but I would like to have the balance in a relationship where that space is held for me and where I can be free enough to really go that deep. And I think many women who are as mindful of their feminine energy would say the same. And that's a whole different discussion as well, because, like we said, it hasn't been that safe either. So it's a beautiful balance that you can have. But playing is really great, creating is really great, and enjoying are really great ways to get in touch with that side of yourself, and not judging, not being afraid, because it's not going to take over. You're not going to become gay, like whatever stereotype one might have. It has nothing to do with that. Like I said, we all embody both sides anyway.
You make me think about how many amazing breakthroughs I've had just in the last 6 months alone since I've gone down this journey to get more present to all this stuff, and my ability to listen and be more curious about my wife, and her ability to openly share feedback with me. We're at this point now where she's not afraid to just pause and call something out. Be like, Adam, this is the thing, you're doing it. There was one moment that, and as soon as it comes out, I'm like, oh, this has been in there for a little bit. But she was talking about interrupting. And she goes, I know that you always have ideas, and I really appreciate your ideas. But it's also very demeaning to me when you just blurt in with your ideas. And she knows that I don't have ideas that are like correcting her, or I'm interrupting her to be like, you're wrong. It's just like, oh, I have this thing. And she's like, but to me, it makes it feel like you're more important than me, and I don't have that space to be here anymore. And like, just being able to have those types of conversations and get that feedback is so eye-opening. And so I'd love to hear, what are some things that you've seen work, or tips that you've got for guys to be able to create more space for that type of vulnerability, feedback, discussion to happen?
By listening and by holding space, you actually create more love. Like, if I'm quiet, Adam, and I'm just here soaking up everything you're saying to me and fully, being present with you and honoring what you're saying, I am mindful that I'm your guest on this podcast, and then we would both just be quiet, waiting for the other person to say something. So that wouldn't have worked in this setting, but hopefully it worked a few months ago when we spoke and we honored your ideas. And that made it allowed you to reach something new. It didn't cost me anything. It comes with great joy. So we have this weird idea that, and I used to be like this, or, as an A-type and an Aries, I'm like quite fiery and was like kind of the leader of the group. But now I'm like, oh, like, tell me everything. Like, I want to hear, like, fill me with your stories. Like, and I think if the masculine is willing to just kind of hold sometimes, that's really nice for the feminine energy, because then the feminine energy gets to play and blossom, and it needs that. Again, not about men and women. But if you are a man or a woman in a relationship, watch what it does for your partner when you're just like, wow, that's amazing. And you look so beautiful telling it to me. Gosh, like you make someone's day, and that's better than anything. And unfortunately, we spend so much time being focused on competition, and I don't believe that the best ideas come out of competition at all. And none of my okay, like maybe I shouldn't say this out loud. Like I'm super love driven. I really try to avoid contracts or agreements that have like a non-solicit or like a non-whatever. I'm like, okay, if that's going to be better for you after, and you're going to have this beautiful relationship, amazing. Like go for it. It's only going to be better. Like when your energy is done in one place, you need to have the freedom to move on. So there's a lot to say for just trusting and surrendering. And I'm not saying it all, well, I personally believe it always works out. I'm sure that will trigger some people. We've all had our experiences in business that maybe didn't serve us at first glance. I believe that they do, and that everything is a learning experience. So watching what that does for a partner is really amazing.
Yeah, I think the takeaway there for me is the power of listening, and where that ends up being hard for guys and where it's been hard for me in the past is this desire. It feels innate at some time to like have the right answer, solve the problem, fix the thing, as opposed to just being there as, yeah, I hear you. And that's other feedback that I've got is like, there's sometimes that you don't need to solve the problem. There's nothing to fix. The space just needs to be created for it to come out. And I've tried that on now with guys too, not just, my wife or my mom or people, women in my life that I love, when I can just be like, yeah, I hear you. That really sucks. Or like, wow, that's amazing. And I don't need to add any new ideas to it. But doing the same thing with guys, what's fascinating to me, what happens is that there then is more space for vulnerability to come out. And then you get the next level of the thing that they're really trying to tell you that's there. Just because you didn't respond with, I have an answer, or here's my story, or whatever. It's just, yeah, I'm really curious about that. What else comes up for you? Just questions like that of not having the right answer have been so powerful, but also freaking hard.
What are the results that you see? How does it reflect in your relationship?
Deeper connection, more love, more trust, all the things that we all want. And it's just the reminder, at least for me, how often our ego gets in the way of the life and the being that we ultimately want to be.
Yeah, sure. I have to tell you a funny story. I had a friend who was taking care of some travel arrangements, and I mean, he's great at it. And he's like, yeah, you always like, don't worry, I'm going to take care of this. And I was like, no, that's all right. Like, I already sorted it out. Literally called me, and he was like, listen, I know you're very independent, and I know you grew up in all these places, and I know you know how to manage travel, but this is what I do. And you would really honor my masculine need to do this if you would just let me get on with it. And I was like, okay, you're right. And that was really helpful too, right? Because when we were told to go and be entrepreneurs, and I'm talking we as in women, girls, we were told, go play soccer, become like Mia Hamm, or, you can start your own business and you can have it all. And yeah, okay, we can for sure. But also understanding when you come, I believe this, and maybe, other feminists don't. But when I had the other day, like, it was raining and I was going to go listen to, this was in the Netherlands. It was raining and I was going to go listen to my mom sing in the choir. And it was like a 7-minute walk to the church. It's not far, but it was like raining really hard. And I had like done, I'd done my makeup, like, cause no, we're not doing makeup for any reasons, except for if we're on a webinar, like whatever, like I hardly do it anymore. But this was a church and, it was Christmas and I wanted to really honor my mom singing. And I looked at my dad and I'm like, Daddy, like I don't really want to walk in the rain, and I'm like a 33-year-old grown woman. And my dad looks at me, he's like, okay, fine, because it's you. Normally he'd be like, grab an umbrella and go. And I just realized that for him, being able to drop his daughter off in the morning to listen to his wife was what he needed. Like I could just see the joy. No, seriously, like he was like, and he doesn't talk like that. I remember getting ready for prom And he was like, well, I hope you have a good time. And I'm like, well, this is prom, Dad. I think you should say a little bit more than that. But now he looked at me, you know, and maybe it's an age thing, but he looked at me, he was like, well, because it's you, like, come on, get in the car. And it's super inconvenient. Like, you can't even park at the church. So it really didn't serve, anyway. I think letting each person show up as they need to. And that's something that, you know, I think this generation of, like, yeah, how do I say this without triggering maybe a feminist thought, a negative feminist response, but it is okay. It is okay to give your dad such enjoyment of doing something like that. And then you know, it's a balance is essentially what I'm trying to say. So it's sweet of you to want to hold that space and not necessarily fix the problem. And I equally think it's important that the feminine energy sometimes just lets the masculine fix it. It's nice.
Yeah. Yeah. And to what we keep talking about, maybe it's not even a masculine or feminine energy. This is really just about respecting people's needs and desires for the things that really bring them love and joy. You know, I think, you know, when respecting people's needs and desires on the other side of the house, maybe it's a little bit different, but it's like, hey, it'd be really great if you allow me to do this because it'll bring me a tremendous amount of joy. Like, imagine if that's how we communicated to each other, as opposed to, like, you know, I'm trying to think of a good example off the top of my head, but, you know, your dad's thing, you know, if you were like, if he was like, I'm gonna have to go back and edit this part of it. But, like, if instead of just being hurt or angered or frustrated when we don't get to do the thing that we thought was a really nice thing, and, like, you know, we feel bad about it, it's like, what if we could actually communicate to the person? Like, it sounds like your travel friend did, who was like, hey, let me do this. I'm good at it. I got it. If we were just able to communicate in the moment that often, it would make a different world.
Yeah, I love that you say that. You're 100% right. It is really about empowering everybody just to turn up how they need to turn up and keeping that safe. And that was actually one of the first parts of the conversation and what we wanted to talk about today. And having that safety and having that safe space where we do have the energies balanced and the needs and desires met in just an honest and healthy way is really, really powerful.
Yeah, it's like, I'm a super visual person, if you haven't been able to tell, but I think about it as this, like, force field almost, that when you can set it up and people are in it, they're kind of like, oh, you know, here it is. Where's this been my whole life? You know, this weight has been lifted off my shoulder. Like, I feel energized and I can be fully self-expressed. And, like, that's the magic of creating these psychologically safe spaces, vulnerable spaces, whatever you want to call them, that people then can step into. And that's where
For
magic
sure.
happens, whether it's with your partner or with your team or with your friends. I mean, good and unexpected things happen there. A lot of unexpected things.
Yeah, 100%. No, that's lovely. And that's the starting point, I think, you know, and hopefully in the next 4 years, we don't have a lot of time, but we can heal a lot of that. And that's back to the fear-based worry that, you know, we're losing something, but we're not. We need to see it as evolving. And especially in relationships, you know, no matter what the makeup, no matter what the partnerships, no matter if there's more people involved, I am Dutch. Okay, we have zero, we have zero rules on what relationships need to look like, and I freaking love that about my culture. But whatever it is, it's an evolution, and if you can honor that evolution, I mean, oh man, like if you're on Earth for like 60 plus years with one person, I hope that you honor each other's evolution, and I hope that you honor the different changing desires before it's too late, you know. And go with the flow and go with the wave of those changes is really beautiful as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so far I've heard we need to have follow-up conversations about several things. Now we're getting into ego and fear, which usually end up being the underpinnings of a lot of this stuff. But, you know, a lot of topics that I hope to cover one day, whether it's with you or somebody equally as awesome. So I know you've got an important shoot coming up. So to wrap up, I would love to know your final pieces of wisdom that you would love to leave men specifically, but also everybody who might be watching this down the line. What can you tell them about mental health, masculinity, male, female energy? What do you want to leave people with?
Well, Adam, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I think the one thing I would say is prioritize mental health. Wake up, do your meditation, 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes at night, and anytime during the day. There's so many great ways to do it. Audio clips, just breath work, journaling, whatever it takes. And that's for men and women and anyone really who associates anyway. But now is the time. Now is the time. We can't go out as much. We have that opportunity. So make the most of the strength that comes from understanding yourself.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much for being here. I always enjoy our conversation. I know that we have more to catch up on. I am going to do our show wrap up, and then I'll be back to chat with you in a second. So thanks again for being here.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
All right, see ya. All right, everybody, that does it for our show today. Thank you so much for showing up, for listening, for being curious, for sticking around with us. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, you can stay in touch with what we're up to at Mandate the Show across all the social channels. If you want to get notified when things are going down, new episodes, insights, you can sign up at mandateshow.com, where I share out weekly my progress with the mandate and my bigger vision for men's mental health more broadly. So I'd love to have you along and get your feedback and ideas as I'm building this. And then, I hope y'all have a lovely rest of the day. If you're watching this live, if you're watching this afterwards, hope you enjoyed the show and have something that you can take away from it, whether it's how you can create more space for the people that you love to be themselves, to be vulnerable, how you can honor other people's authentic selves and needs, whether it's their masculine or their feminine energy, and just what might be available to you as a human when you think about tapping into more than maybe what you've known to be your kind of core energy, if you will. So have a good one, and we will see you next time.